I'm Benjamin Cohen. You're watching Pink News Live. Unsurprisingly, you might realise who's here. We're joined by Jeremy Corbyn, who's running for re-election as leader of the Labour Party, and my colleague Joe Williams from the Pink News team, who's going to be sort of keeping an eye on social media all the way through them.
Any questions you've got coming through, I'll try my best to get them to Jeremy during our discussion. Be sure to react to anything that Ben and Jeremy discuss.
So firstly, we've got an announcement at Pink News, which is that Jeremy's going to be joining us at the Pink News Awards this year on the 26th of October, which we're really pleased for. A quick question, if the polls are wrong and you're not the Labour leader, will you still come anyway?
Yes.
Excellent.
And I'm really pleased that the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, is helping and supporting the event and having a reception in his staterooms, because I think it shows an inclusive attitude by him. He's a nice man.
He's brilliant.
Oh, he's lovely.
He's been a great supporter of ours. So Jeremy, should we start by just you telling the audience, before we go through the questions that have been sent in and the live questions, why you should be re-elected as leader of the Labour Party and why you could become the next Labour Prime Minister?
I was elected a year ago with a very big mandate. The main policy was one of challenging the economics of austerity, but there were a lot of other issues around it as well, and that's about democracy in the Labour Party and an inclusive approach of the party towards all communities. And over the past year, there have obviously been difficulties. That's fairly obvious. That's why we're having another election campaign. But 300,000 people have joined the Labour Party in that process, and we're reaching out to all communities in a way that I've never known in my lifetime before. I've spent my lifetime in politics, on human rights issues, on social justice issues, on international and peace issues, and I use that experience to try to guide our party into a direction which seems to be getting a lot of support from party members, and there are some who have yet to be persuaded, but I'm doing my best to persuade them.
Well, we can try and persuade the Labour Party members who follow Pink News now in the question.
Welcome all.
So we've had lots of questions sent in by readers already, around 1,000 questions submitted on the Pink News website and through Facebook and Twitter. I'm going to just go through some of them now. So here's the first one. A pretty identical question was asked by 24 people, and this one I'm going to read out is from someone called Sam, who lives in St Ives in Cambridgeshire. And they asked, with rising demands on NHS services for gender confirmation treatment for trans and non-binary people, but escalating waiting lists, what would you do and what do you propose to try and improve the service that the NHS gives to trans and non-binary people?
Fully fund it, of course. Virtually every NHS district is underfunded at the moment. Every NHS hospital is in debt, or quite serious debt, often through PFI contracts. And there's also a question of priorities that have to be decided upon then. So I think it's also an education process, so it'd be a combination of all of those things.
Do you think that the current provision by NHS is inadequate?
It appears to be, and certainly what I've been told by constituents who want help and support, that they often have to wait a very long time for it. So it's often too easy to set down targets for everything nationally, but I do think there has to be a requirement that all patients are treated promptly and all treated equally.
Should businesses contribute? So we know we wrote this story that Lloyds Banking Group offer to their transgender staff transgender reassignment surgery as part of their health policy. Do you think that more companies should do that, or should it be the state that provides that?
I'm a supporter of the principle of a health service free at the point of use for all. And whilst at one level it sounds attractive to companies to offer support for that, that then means that those who don't happen to work for that company or don't work in any kind of area where that would be done would lose out. So I'd much rather we funded the issues publicly, and if companies have spare money around, they're free to donate it to the National Health Service or pay more in tax.
Can I just briefly cut in some of our readers? We're asking if you could both speak on slightly.
Yeah, I was thinking that as well. Hello readers, we are now speaking properly and clearly. Is that okay?
I think
okay.
Fine, yeah,
So here's a fun question. Well, it's an interesting question that was sent in.
All questions are fun.
From James in Newcastle. James says, when did you first realise that you are heterosexual, assuming that you are?
Great question, James. I don't know really. Probably as a teenager, I would imagine, as most people do. So 13, 14, that sort of age, I guess.
Do you empathise with the challenge that people have when they are teenagers and they're starting to realise that actually they aren't the norm, they aren't heterosexual?
Absolutely, because the atmosphere in many schools is awful. The abuse of gay people is awful. The way in which lesbian girls are often demonised by their colleagues just as much as gay boys are. And I was brought up in a rural community in Shropshire, and it was a boys' school, and I look back on it and I just remember sort of awful language that was used against one or two teachers. I don't know if they were gay or not. I never asked them.
So it was real homophobia.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then later on, I was living in Jamaica as a VSO volunteer there, and there was a big degree of homophobia. There was also quite a big gay community, who I knew many of the people in, and I was very friendly to them, and I got on very well. I found them interesting to talk to. And then later I became a councillor in Islington, Harringay rather, MP of Islington, Harringay councillor in the 70s. And there was a gay centre in Finsbury Park, which was under attack from the National Front. And we persuaded the local residents to defend the gay centre against the National Front, which they did successfully. And that then became a sort of quite interesting discussion about the rights of people to their own identity in society. It taught me a lot.
So this is a kind of related question that came in from 14 people, as well as Elizabeth from Yorkshire. And she said...
doesn't that make it 50?
15 people, yeah.
14 plus Elizabeth.
I think including, actually, I wrote, but I probably said that wrong. So she says, I'd like to know what your plan is for making age-appropriate and comprehensive sex and relationship lessons compulsory through all primary and secondary schools. And I would add, do you think that should include all faith schools?
Yes, it's got to be there in all schools. And we have to have an opportunity for all young people to understand diversity in all its forms, understand sexual diversity as well as ethnic diversity, every other kind of diversity. And if it's not provided in our schools, then many of our children will simply never get to understand it at all.
So we've been told, and we've written stories about from sources saying that there were quite considerable disagreements within Cabinet under the last Prime Minister around whether sex and relationship education should be compulsory. Do you think that the government have let students down by not having it compulsory?
I think it should be compulsory, and I do think they have, yes. I can imagine the debate that's taken place, because there's, in all political decisions, there's always a concern that a particular group is going to get very angry about this, a particular faith group is going to get very angry about this. But I think we live in a society where there has to be respect for whatever identity or point of view people have. And therefore, the education service is crucial to that. And it's particularly important when we now have a greater breadth of administration of schools, where we've got foundation schools, we've got academies, we've got free schools, and we've got the more traditional maintained schools. Personally, I favour the founding of education through local authorities, but nevertheless, if we don't then insist on all the education being available for all children, a whole generation can grow up never having had the advantage of any sex education in school.
Joe, is there any interesting comments?
We're getting a lot of, obviously, understandably, we're getting a lot of feedback from our readers. Some of them are saying, please still speak up. But
Okay,
others are saying the sound is fine. So,
Okay.
Should we take a poll on this sound versus speaking up thing?
But some of the questions we're getting, especially on, as far as people have talked quite a lot actually about the Labour Party itself.
I'm going to ask one. Do you want to go for one, or shall I give
You
one?
can go for first, and I can maybe say what's
Okay.
afterwards about.
So there's a question that was sent in from Robin and lots of other people, which says the LGBT community, in their view, needs a Labour government to be in power to achieve full equality. How do you hope to lead the country, they say, when the Labour Party in Parliament is in such disarray?
Well, the Labour Party is a huge organisation, and the support is enormous of registered supporters, as well as obviously people that would vote Labour. Yes, there have been disagreements in the candidates, but actually on a lot of issues there isn't that much disagreement. There isn't that much disagreement on policy issues. When we put the Equalities Act through during the last Labour government, that went through with no opposition whatsoever within the Parliamentary Labour Party. Indeed, the only concerns were it should have gone further and been more assertive in certain places. So the idea that the party is completely divided is something that's often greatly exaggerated by a lot of the media. My purpose is, I'm standing again for election. If we're elected, we will continue with the opposition to austerity, continue with the programme of opposing the growing inequality within our society, and ensure that the human rights we have through the Human Rights Act, the Equalities Act, the European Convention on Human Rights, as well as, of course, the Universal Declaration, are absolutely adhered to. And in a post-EU referendum atmosphere, to me, that is an absolute red line. All those rights that we have now enshrined in UK law because of the adoption of case law from the European Convention and the European Court of Human Rights have got to be preserved.
But in terms of the Labour Party itself, do you accept, I'm assuming you do, that in terms of the parliamentary party, there's not a coherent sort of view, there's disagreement between supporters of yours and people who don't support you? Is that not problematic for being able to be a leader?
It means we have to reach out, and it means that members of the Parliamentary Labour Party have also got to understand that if I'm elected by a majority, a very substantial majority last time round, of members and active supporters of the party, then that says something. And I'm more than happy to cooperate with people and will do so, because I want to see the party come together. I want to see a Labour government, because a Labour government is the best vehicle for delivering the kind of more equal society we want, but it's also a society based on justice and human rights, and that's what I want to do.
Well, based on that, some people have been bringing up the issue of homophobia within the Labour Party, and obviously there's been recent accusations made by Angela Eagle of homophobia from a minority of your supporters, is how she worded it. And some of our readers are asking that, do they still have a place in the party as members of the LGBT community, especially based also on the recent the Fabian Society also, they released a report last week saying they agree.
But there was a problem with
there's a problem with
candidates.
LGBT candidates and also the treatment of LGBT people in
Absolutely.
the party.
The LGBTQ community does, of course, have a huge place in the Labour Party and always will. It was, after all, Labour governments that pioneered much of the legislation we have. Homosexual law reform in the first place, and later on Human Rights Act, which I've already mentioned. If anyone is acting in a homophobic way in the Labour Party, they are wrong. They will have no support whatsoever from me in doing that. I absolutely condemn it, and they should be investigated for their behaviour. And if they are found to have committed homophobic acts or made homophobic comments, then there are sanctions open to them, open to the National Executive to take. That is why I was concerned about reports I'd received of issues of anti-Semitism and racism in the party. I therefore appointed Shami Chakrabarti to undertake an inquiry into it, which she did. I asked her to do it in good time. She did it in 2 months, which is a very short time for such a major report, but I felt we had to get on the front foot and deal with it. And she produced a very good report, which suggests there has to be a more transparent process within the party for dealing with these allegations, so that obviously the allegation is made, the person has a right to defence, and so on, all the sort of basic norms of
Do you
natural
accept the
justice.
kind of allegations that Angela Eagle has made?
Angela has suffered homophobic abuse, which is absolutely and totally wrong, and I support her in standing up against that. If anyone who claims to be a supporter of mine is making homophobic remarks and homophobic abuse, then they are wrong.
Okay.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Shall I get to the next question?
Just carry on.
So this is a question being asked by lots of people, including Sanjay from Leeds. He says, do you think that NHS England is right to deny access to PrEP drugs that can help prevent the transmission of HIV? For context for readers, PrEP stands for pre-exposure prophylaxis, and they're drugs that can reduce transmission rates.
I think they should be available, and I think the NHS should be providing them.
point blank.
Yes.
Any concerns about the impact on sexual activity and potential increases in other sexually transmitted disease that might come with increased
Become
use
because of it. Well, it's also a process of education, isn't it? But I think the availability of supportive drugs has got to be a good thing. Surely that's what health is about.
Do you think it's therefore, is this a political mistake by the government, or do you think this is actually just a mistake by the agency, and in this case, NHS England? Do you think it could be different if the Health Secretary was saying this should be done?
Probably more likely a decision by the agency, I would have thought.
So you don't blame the government specifically for this?
I wouldn't say I do blame them or don't blame them. I'd like to know what their thinking is behind this decision and whether or not NHS England contacted them on that. And I'm very sure that our excellent Shadow Health Secretary Diana will be taking this matter.
Can ask her afterwards.
She's actually in the next room at the moment.
She's there.
In fact, we were talking about this earlier on, so I'm sure she'll be taking it up.
Okay, so here's a question that's relatively topical. This was sent in by Alex from Sutton. What's your stance on the recent WikiLeaks publication of the names of gay and HIV positive people in Saudi Arabia? Do you consider it to be a criminal offence, and if so, which parties do you consider to be guilty?
Well, the problem is the law in Saudi Arabia and the behaviour of the government of Saudi Arabia on the rights of people to express their sexuality. Surely that is the problem. The release of the names by Wikipedia suggests...
WikiLeaks.
Wow, that was a big organised. Wikipedia releases everything all the time, doesn't it? WikiLeaks. Well, who's the information belong to?
Well, it's leaked information from the Saudi government, which WikiLeaks had.
So it suggests the Saudi government was picking up collating a list of these names in order to take action against them at some stage in the future, I would have thought. Is that a good thing for them to release it or not? That's a hard one, because at one level it shows there is a gay community in Saudi Arabia, and it shows the nonsense of the laws of Saudi Arabia. But the other side of it is, of course, incredibly dangerous for the individuals concerned, and I think they should think very carefully about that.
So when Joe interviewed you last year, we were talking about issues like Saudi Arabia. Do you want to pick up?
Yeah, previously, and it's something that people have been bringing up when they're talking about international LGBT rights, which is still a huge issue. When we spoke last year, we briefly touched on, I think, Iran. It was what we spoke of in particular, and it was that you did suggest maybe, stopping trade with some of these countries, or reducing the economic relationship that we have with some of the countries that execute core human rights, and specifically we spoke about homophobic laws that still exist. And do you still stand by that? We're being asked, would you still deal with these countries in an economic way?
A couple of things. One is that I think it's important to always raise human rights issues which the country is dealing with. And when you interviewed me last year, I've in fact been in recent past on a delegation to Iran and had raised a very large number of human rights issues with the Iranian government, including the treatment of lesbian and gay people in Iran. Since then, there was the Syrian conference in which a lot of countries came, and I used that opportunity to meet a number of people, including the Iranian Foreign Minister, and raised again the whole issues with him. So I do see it as important that a British foreign policy should quite rightly condemn the use of the death penalty anywhere in the world, and indeed British representatives at the UN Human Rights Council, when they're doing universal periodic reviews, do that. They should do exactly the same on sexual rights, on transgender, on gay, on lesbian people. They should do all of that. And at the moment I'm drafting some plans on trade policies that we would put forward and the requirements we would have. At the moment, the EU trade treaties have a general clause on human rights, which isn't over-specific, but it is, nevertheless, it's a start. I would want to go a lot further than that, so that when we trade with another country, it actually can be a plus in environmental concerns, it can be a plus in human rights concerns.
So you're going to be lobbying Liam Fox to introduce?
I will have a chat with Liam Fox about it. Now, it might be a hard task, but I'll give it a go.
So
I don't mind a hard task.
Aligned to this, this is a question that's been asked by a lot of people 37 on the website and lots on Facebook and Twitter. This specific one comes from Danielle in Islington. I don't know whether she's a constituent, but it's linked to what we've just been talking about. They say, Jeremy, I really like a lot of what you stand for, but I'm troubled by the fact that you accepted money to present a programme for state-funded outlet Press TV, considering the terrible way that Iran treats LGBT people, such as just this month, according, they say, to Amnesty International, executing a teenage boy for being gay. Do you regret doing the work?
I did some programmes for Press TV quite a long time ago. I refused to do any more because there was a change in the process they were operating. They'd asked me to present a programme about discussing the elections in Iran. I was prepared to do that, and then they changed it to a title which was going to be the Western influence of the elections in Iran, so I refused to do that programme anymore with them. I presented other programmes in which I was able to raise a number of human rights issues, not just in Iran, other countries as well, and did that, and the money I was paid, which wasn't an enormous amount, actually went on my constituency office.
Do you accept the criticism though that people make about that? Because of some say, and I'm not going to read all the ones we've got sent out, people accuse you of hypocrisy in different
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously they're free to make the criticism they wish. I use the opportunities to address the issues of the Western relationship with the whole region, address the issues of Iraq, and also address issues of human rights, even in a very difficult atmosphere where you're dealing with countries and governments that clearly don't have the same human rights agenda that I do or we do around this table. And so I always use those opportunities. Everywhere I've ever travelled, I've always raised the issues of human rights, however easy or difficult it is.
Okay. Just based on that, we just had the question. Previous comments have been made, I'm not sure if I've spoken differently about it since, but about helping or aiding a UN country, if they were automatically helping them if they were invaded by, we just asked, if a country was invaded by another country that was executing homosexuals and trans and lesbian people, would you, because you're a huge supporter of human rights, would you step in? If you were Prime Minister, would you condone us getting involved in the military?
I think you have to be very careful about what you mean by military intervention, what you can do. I do think there has to be a strong demand placed on governments and countries that are abusing human rights. So take for Uganda, for example, and its laws. I've met representatives of the Ugandan government and MPs and made the points very bluntly to them. I've suggested the use of trade as a pressure on this. I've suggested the use of the UN Human Rights Council as a pressure on this, and I think you can begin to make progress in that way.
I think what people are worried about is these deaths are happening now in some of these countries regularly, and I think sometimes the reason some people sway towards, some of our readers saying they would sway towards militarised action, is to stop these. It's a kind of temporary measure, and then you'd go in afterwards with the trade talks and the diplomacy, because obviously the scenes that we see, especially from what's going on in Syria at the moment, they are quite graphic, and it's happening every day.
Syria, there has to be a political solution. At the end of the day, the invasion of Syria by other forces isn't going to help. I was opposed to the bombing of Syria because I thought it would actually delay the political process. The situation in Syria is obviously awful. There is a temporary ceasefire around Aleppo at the moment. That is a good thing. I hope the ceasefire can be turned into a permanent one and the aid can get through, and that the political process isn't just about Russia being here, Turkey being here, Saudi Arabia being here, Jordan being here, and the refugees being everywhere else. It's going to be about the kind of society you want to create in Syria that represents the diversity of all of the ethnic groups in Syria and protects the human rights of everyone in Syria. That has to be the right way forward. I'm not sure you can necessarily say there is a military solution to everything.
In terms of diplomacy, you become Prime Minister. There are still, I think it's 10 countries which execute LGBT people. There are 70 of which criminalise LGBT people. What would you do? Some of those are countries which you do know people, for example, Iran. What would be the sort of conversations that you would have with the leadership of those countries in the guise of being the British Prime Minister?
I'd say to them, first up, you, Iran, are a signatory to the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Observe it. You, Iran, have signed up to a whole lot of human rights issues beyond the convention. Observe them, and if you want to have a normal relationship with us, then we in this country have fortunately ended capital punishment a long time ago. Fortunately, we changed laws on homosexuality originally in the 1960s, but it's moved on a long way since then. We've got some pretty bad past ourselves, you know, on a lot of these issues. And so I think what I've said to people in other countries, well, actually, we've done some pretty bad things in Britain as well. You know, we're not perfect. Campaigners, very brave people, managed to change laws and change attitudes.
So this is a question you're probably not going to like, but we've been sent it a lot by people, which is, can you clarify the train situation?
The train situation.
Yeah.
Oh, the train. I got on a train with a group of people.
Yeah.
We were looking for a group of seats together. We had not reserved seats because we weren't sure which train we were going to be able to get. We were going to Newcastle at the time. A very nice man who's a train manager knows me, of me, recognised me.
I think a lot of people recognise you.
It does happen. And offered me a upgrade to first class for me and the entire team. I said it was very kind of him, but no, we couldn't accept that because we'd only paid for second class tickets. I then journeyed through the train, found it pretty full, reserved tickets on seats as I went through, and so I went to the end and I thought I'll just hang around at the end of the train until after the first stop and maybe some people are getting out and I'll get a seat. So I decided to relax on the floor and read Private Eye.
As you did.
As you do. And I had a nice chat with the lady sitting next to me on the floor with her baby. We got on very well, the chat. And then eventually, well, not that long later actually, the train manager...
Because they also couldn't get seats, presumably.
Absolutely. There was quite a lot of people who couldn't get seats that day. And the train manager then appeared and he said, good news, I've managed to find a space for a family to go up to first class, and they've gone there, and your group can come and sit down in their seats. And I said, that's very kind of you. Does that include the other people who are either standing or sitting on the floor? And so he said, yes, of course it does. So seats were found for everybody. I want to just say thank you to the train staff of Virgin Trains. They're very nice people.
Do you think the Virgin Trains and Richard Branson haven't treated you fairly?
Well,
releasing CCTV.
They should not be releasing CCTV of people travelling on a train.
Potentially breaching the
well,
protection.
they're being investigated at the moment, so let's not.
Okay.
Let's not prejudge an investigation.
Okay.
Do you wish to continue the discussion on trains?
Not really.
I travel on trains the whole time.
What's your favourite train? That did actually get sent with so. What's your favourite train journey?
Favourite train journey? Probably the East Coast one up to Scotland. After you get from Newcastle, going past Bamber Castle that way. Or the other one, of course, is the magic one, of course, through Dorchworth.
So a more serious issue.
Well, there's nothing more serious
than trains. It's the biggest story of the week. This is serious and a quite devastating story. Gay cure therapy is still significantly offered in this country and indeed in other countries. So the idea of treating people to stop them being gay through different interventions. Consistently, government ministers have said that this should be stamped out. Nicky Morgan at the Pink News Awards last year said that. David Cameron in his election interview with us said similar words, but no one's actually done anything about it. If you were...
How is it being offered?
So it's being offered through referrals, still from some GPs will make referrals to psychotherapists who can offer treatments. Some people are still being given sort of electric shock therapy. I'm aware, sort of personally, of people who've unfortunately taken their lives when the therapy hasn't worked. Some countries and some places, so California for example, outlaws it for under 21s. There's no restrictions in this country, although the NHS cannot offer the service, and that's been for the last few years. The actual practice is totally allowed. If you're Prime Minister, would you actually ban it?
I don't think the practice should be operating.
So you ban it?
Should be. Yeah, there should be. Surely, if somebody has identified themselves as a gay man, a gay woman, then
what happens if they say,
can't we just accept?
What happens if they say, I think I'm gay, but I don't want to be gay? So when we talked earlier, and you said when you first realised you were heterosexual when you were 14, what happens if someone was 14 and they think, I'm probably gay, but I'm religious, Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, I don't really want to be? Would it be right for them to seek help?
Yes.
But
They
what
should,
sort of
they
help?
should be able to seek help to discuss
Counselling.
their identity counselling, but it shouldn't be pejorative prejudging counselling, which decides what they're going to be at the end of it. It should be trying to help them explore their views, explore their ideas, explore their identity.
But they shouldn't be offered if they asked for it to be helped to cure their homosexuality.
Well, I don't think it's a disease, so it's not something you
Just to tie into that quickly.
Yeah, quickly.
It's
One last
just,
question.
it's just people are, a lot of questions we've had are on the current services offered, mental health services offered in general, and specifically to LGBT people, which a lot of our readers are saying aren't good enough, and they're not even sure what services are.
Your readers are absolutely right. The issue of mental health services in Britain is something that I feel very, very strongly about. A quarter of us are going to have a crisis in our own lives. I mean, there's 5 of us in this room, so 1 1/4 of us is going to have a problem during our lives. We're going to get stressed. We might be.
And LGBT people are disproportionate.
And indeed so, disproportionately likely to be stressed as a result of it. Some people do get very good help and support through the NHS, many don't. Many face too many hurdles and too much prejudice that they can't even talk about it. Particularly young people in college and university often don't want to talk about it, don't get any support or help. And the numbers of young men that take their own lives whilst going through a period of deep stress is huge. Therefore, we have to do 2 things. One is genuine parity of esteem in the funding of mental health services and physical health services for everybody. And secondly, an attitude in society to which we can all contribute. How you talk about mental health. Do you make jokes about people and their problems? Do you make jokes about stress? Do you make jokes about it? And also say to all employers, can you provide decent, supportive counselling services and not harm their career prospects because they've sought help because of the stress levels they're going through, which may, of course, be related to the work they're doing in the first place.
So, does this mean more money overall for the NHS, or is it reallocating the resources?
It would have to be new money into the NHS, although a great deal has been taken off mental health services, and there are people who need emergency beds, emergency accommodation. In many parts of the country, they're nowhere near where people live. Some are travelling 100 miles to be taken to an emergency bed. Now, if you think about it, if I'm taken to an emergency bed because I'm in a crisis and I'm going, say, to Birmingham for it, is that convenient for my friends and family to come and support me? Of course it's not. And so there has to be a local arrangement. But there's also a problem over the long wait for talking therapies. Talking therapy waits can be 6 months or more. So if you've finally got it in your mind to go to your GP to say, I'm deeply stressed, I'm having a crisis, a problem, the GP says, thanks very much, have an appointment next January. It's utterly useless. And so what then happens is the GP cannot give the support through the therapy that they might want to. So they end up prescribing suppressive medicines to them, and I don't think that's a good way of doing things.
So I think we're out of time now, but thank
We're out
you.
of time already?
Apparently we're out of
I'm
time.
so enjoying it, this can't be.
So we out of time?
This can't be so
We out of time?
bad.
You've got a bit of time?
You've got a high-speed clock,
We
I
got
can
time?
tell.
One more
Just do we'll just do one more, then we'll go.
One more
question. They said I'll try and sum up all these comments.
All 40,000 of them.
Well, we've got a bit more than that, but no. People are asking. People have said that they're worried. A lot of some people who really like you, you've got a lot of positive feedback, mainly on our chat, and they've said that although they'd like to see you as Prime Minister, they're worried that you can't actually win the majority of the country, even though you're doing well within Labour. They're not sure that'll translate to the electorate.
Okay.
And would you be willing to, if necessary, enter a progressive alliance with other forwarding parties for human rights and LGBT rights, such as SNP, Plaid, and the Liberals? That kind of sums up what people are asking. Would you be willing to form that alliance in order to win a majority, if that was to happen?
2 things on this. Firstly, we're going to campaign very hard to win the election. We're going to campaign on the issues of housing, education, health, all the issues that actually affect pretty well everybody in our society. The idea that the better off middle classes are immune from the problems of housing or the debt levels their children are going to get going to university is not so. They are certainly going to be affected by it. And so we're offering an investment economy which will bring about greater equality, investment through a national investment bank. On issues of how we win votes in Parliament, I'm not proposing to enter into alliances or coalitions with anyone. What I'm saying is we'll put forward these ideas. when a parliamentary vote comes up, as of now, where I might put forward a resolution, somebody else might put forward a resolution on an issue of human rights, of justice, of protecting working tax credits, whatever it happens to be, we will maximise the parliamentary vote on it. Just as much as during the exit negotiation of the European Union, I will obviously try and maximise votes on protecting workers' rights and protecting the human rights provisions, and on, crucially, on opposition to Theresa May's plan to repeal the 1998 Human Rights Act and replace it with the British Bill of Rights. And so, in that sense, you have a parliamentary agreement on a particular subject, and that will pursue.
Can I ask just finally on that? If you continue as Labour leader, but you don't become Prime Minister, do you carry on as Labour leader? Is that the plan?
Well, if we won an election, then
If you didn't become Prime Minister.
well, then we'll see what the situation is at the time. Depends on how many seats we've got, what the result of the election is. A lot of things. That is some way off.
Yeah.
Unless there's going to be an election next month. Do you know something I don't know?
I'm going to number 10 tomorrow, so I'll let you know.
Would you give me a call afterwards?
Okay, so I think that is time now. Just to let viewers and readers know that we'll be back tomorrow with Owen Smith coming and doing pretty much the same questions. Well, different people have sent different questions in, but we'll be back at just after 4 tomorrow. But thanks for everyone. Thanks particularly for Jeremy for taking time out of what has been, I understand, a manic campaigning schedule to come.
Well, I've been doing rallies and meetings all over the country, and it's fun, but very busy and keeps one fully occupied and fully in the train.
Great.
And thank you very much. I'm sorry we were so softly spoken.